Hello, fellow artists, and welcome to episode 5 TED Talks Art. This time round, we're going to discuss networking. So every term, I have a discussion with students about this topic, and more often than not, this is how it goes down. I'll ask a show of hands. How many of you think networking is crucial to finding a job? It's at least as important, if not more so, than your actual skill set. And I'll get all these hands that go up. I'm like, okay. So can anyone tell me what does that look like, and are you doing that? And then I get a lot of blank stares and uncertainty. And it's one of those things, I think, in the back of our minds, we think, yeah, networking, it's really important, but not necessarily take the time to think it further. And to be fair, it's probably because, especially if you're a student or you're learning, you're too focused on the learning and getting your skill set. And maybe the networking thing is, well, it's something I'll deal with a little later. But I think the most common, opinion or consensus, but to varying degree, is that how being at the right place and knowing the right people is really huge. And it is important. But I think the thing to be careful of is putting too much emphasis on that, especially at the expense of skill or merit. Because the thing that's unspoken here is, as important as it is to network and meet people, it goes without saying that the whole point they would be interested is that your portfolio is impressive enough. Right? And I hope that should make sense. Like, you could be the greatest, nicest person ever, but if your portfolio clearly isn't ready, you're not going to get hired. And a lot of times the way a person goes about networking is directly tied to how they view what that looks like, as well as where they place the priority or importance of their skill set. And I'll give you an example of what I mean. It's like a typical thing would be, well, I need to go to a social setting or a conference and maybe go out for a meal or drinks after with these people and just kind of hang out and get to know them and be friends with them. But the thing about that is, in that context already, the priority isn't about finding a job for that person. In fact, if that's your goal, you have to be very careful, because sometimes that comes across as kind of fake or ulterior motive. Right? It's almost like the equivalent to going to a bar to meet people, right? There's this kind of stigma about that, as opposed to naturally meeting someone or being introduced or having a common interest that allows you opportunity to talk to a stranger, right? Let's say you go to life drawing and no one think it would be strange if you start talking to the person beside you who you've never met before, because you're both there for the same reason, and that's to do figure drawing. Right? Or pick up basketball or something. Hey, can I join? Sure, what's your name? No one's going to think you're strange for coming up talking to them, right? Because you're all there. They understand you're there for the same purpose, the same, goal, common goal or common interest. The other thing is, if that's the way we network, then practically speaking, it's not something you can do very often. Like, a common thing I'll hear is, you should go to GDC, Game Developers Conference. Yeah, it's a big deal. It always has been. There's a lot of people there. There's a lot of really amazing and experienced speakers. But the thing is, the main reason for going there is to kind of learn and to showcase some things. A secondary thing would be to network, and even less so for someone who's starting out, because it's so expensive to get there, just to pay for that conference and the plane, the flight, that all adds up. So even if you meet some contacts, get some names and cards, maybe even get a positive conversation, that's a lot of money to pay if that's the only main goal. Okay, I've gone to GDC once, and it wasn't to look for a job. It was when I was already working at Pseudo Interactive, and we all were given a discount to go, and then the main reason was to learn from all these other developers and sign up for all these workshops. That was the real reason to go, and I haven't been back since. So the next thing that's crucial then is, once we understand where the importance networking lies in comparison to how it sits against where your portfolio is, then you can approach it in the appropriate way. Now, my experience has been also kind of transition between what has changed over the years. Because first started like jumping in after art school and starting to look for work in the late 90s. And then, of course, a lot of things have changed in terms of both industry, technology, and communication. In the late 90s, the internet wasn't, prevalent enough or convenient enough. I would go to, government-run employment centers to look up their databases, right? It's the equivalent to Googling it or something, but you didn't have that. Or at least you didn't have something as current or robust. So you'd actually go to these places and do a job search for that and print it out on these like old school dot matrix printers and that sort of thing. The other thing is, portfolio-wise, it was literally a physical portfolio. So I would, go to Kinko's or something or some local photocopier place and try to print out a decent quality portfolio, but it all adds up, so you can't go crazy with the quality of it, but it has to be decent enough that it represents your art well. Print all that out, get some kind of portfolio, simple portfolio folder or case or something, put those in, and then snail mail these suckers out to all the companies. And those companies I found from going to the employment center and looking through the phone book and sort of on a smaller scale their internet until I got further along in the future. And that took a lot of time. So the key thing, especially for those of you who are starting out, is you're looking for a job, obviously. But guess what your job is? To look for a job. So in other words, you have to consider the whole objective of job search as a job in itself, meaning you're very intentional and you make some goals and a schedule. It might be, I'm going to get up today and I'm going to start off by working on the next portfolio piece. And then I'm going to start researching a bunch of companies. And then it might be, well, I'm going to contact them. I'm going to call them, or the ones that are close by, I'm actually going to go visit and drop off my resume. And and you've set out how many companies you're going to send these out to, right? You have to treat it as a job. Now, as time has gone by, certainly the internet plays a huge role. First and foremost is no longer need to do physical portfolios. So it went actually from physical portfolios to getting my work on a CD and sending that out to eventually having it online as the years went by. Case in point, when I got hired at Pseudo Interactive in Toronto, it had been about 4 or 5 months prior that I had applied to them. I had applied to them in Vancouver and kind of forgot about it. I just happened to move to Toronto, not because I knew that job was coming up, but because I wanted to be with my family, my brothers and their kids. And then 3 months later, Pseudo Interactive contacted me. So fortunately, I was in Toronto, because if I was still in Vancouver, that wouldn't have been an option. They weren't some big company that could fly me out. Okay, so fast forward about 7 years later, like I started there in early 2000 and finished up there at the end of 2006 and went the freelance route. And the first thing I needed to do was update my portfolio. So I spent a good chunk of the year doing that. And then essentially I was putting up my stuff online. And then the next question I ask my students is, how many websites do you guys think I put my portfolio up, my work on? And they'll be like, I don't know, 5, 10, 25. I don't know, try 150. Yeah, so I put my work on 150 websites. But I prioritize them, right, in order of importance, because that's too time consuming to update the same amount or quantity of work on all those websites, right? So I might have my top 20 and then my top 10 and then my top 5 out of those 150. So a good chunk of them I would just do select a number of pieces and just leave it there and not necessarily update it. It was just sending out kind of feelers out there. So my thinking was, if even one person saw my work on that site and contacted me, then it was worth it, whether or not I got a contract or not. So obviously my own official site and some other more robust websites I would spend a little more time updating. So the key is, not to assume that you're going to get a lot of exposure, because you could be the greatest artist ever, but if no one knows who you are, why would they look for you? Because they don't know you exist. The way I would look at this networking, it's kind of like advertising and marketing, let's say for a restaurant. and all the expectations that come from it. If you have a restaurant that's in a prime location, and then the name of it is pretty catchy, and then the exterior and the interior is very appealing, then everyone who comes in there is expecting the food is just as good as its context. That given it's in a wealthy area or it looks beautiful, then you're going to probably expect some top-notch food. So there's this extra pressure to make sure the quality is good. But let's say there's a restaurant that doesn't have the best location, and in fact, you don't see it from the road. The reason it does well is word of mouth. And that word of mouth meaning, in this case, that customers realize the food's really good, and they pass it on to their friends. And there's also bad word of mouth, which will kill a business, obviously. So that same idea is, there's this new obscure restaurant that's kind of out of the way, and I went there. The food was terrible. I'm going to tell everyone about that. And then soon after that, restaurant closes down. Okay? So for us, it's kind of like that. You're kind of casting your net out, right? Don't assume your top 5 companies that you want to apply for that they're going to respond. In fact, if you say, these are my top 5 companies, and then the question, what are the other ones? No, I only picked those 5. Well, then they're not your top 5. Right? That's too presumptuous. It might be, I'm sending out to 50 companies, and of course you can have a preference. It doesn't mean you have to want to work at all of them to the same degree. But it's this idea of, for every 5 responses, you sent out 50 applications or something. You don't want to assume that you're going to get that contact or that they're going to reach out to you, because think of all the competition that's out there. So that's why I like that restaurant analogy. If you do good work and you at least attempt to try to get your stuff out there, right, and cast that net, pretty wide. So the one thing that we all have control over is how willing we are to take on certain opportunities, right? So the way I looked at it for me was I was willing to get a job anywhere in Canada and in certain areas of the States, okay? I wasn't willing to go just anywhere. I wasn't willing to go, to Korea or anything like that. But I based on that kind of geography, I guess, casting that net wide, right? So you're not one fishing pole in a small pond. It's casting that net across different oceans and doing it often, right? So if, for example, if you're too narrow and decide, because I'm here in Toronto, I'm only going to work in Toronto, not even just Ontario, the province of Ontario, but the greater Toronto area only. So then that rules out Digital Extremes, even though it's a pretty big studio, but they're in London, Ontario, which is, almost 3 hours away. I'm not willing to work there. And then you limit it even further and say, I'm only willing to work at Ubisoft, and you only apply there. The only way that they're going to contact you, especially if you're just starting out and you don't have experience, it's your skill set and your portfolio is that good. It's the best one of the best they've seen. But most of us don't fall under that category, myself included, right? We are striving and always improving, but there's always someone who's stronger than you. So we do what we can to find the right match, kind of like dating in that sense, right? So the key is, once you send your portfolio out, if you know someone, let's say, my best friend is an art director at this company, okay? If he is a good art director and he's objective, he's not going to base it solely on your friendship. He's going to be able to tell you, you're a great guy, which helps a lot, and that kind of solves the trust question, because I know you're dependable, you work hard, but the bottom line will be, but your skill set is just, you're not there yet, but just, keep going. Right? So if you know someone, you have an in, it's kind of like someone waiting and holding your spot in line for, let's say, a movie, Let's say you want to go watch The Last Jedi, and there's a huge lineup, but your buddy is way at the front of the line, and he saved you a spot, right? That advantage is you didn't have to wait as long, okay? So in terms of networking and jobs, it might be somebody or someone who knows someone. And it's that idea, you get ahead of the line. And what does that mean? ahead of the line to be reviewed and seen. So if your portfolio is amazing and you know someone, then you move up the queue and you get hired not because you know that guy, but because your portfolio is amazing. So you save time in getting hired. Conversely, same scenario, but your portfolio is not strong enough, then you find out sooner rather than later that you didn't make it. Okay, that's the bottom line. Now, yeah, there's instances, and we hear about this in every industry, where someone got a job because they knew someone, but they didn't have the merit. It wasn't based on skill. And that's never good, right? Even if they manage to, have some kind of longevity, they'll have a bad reputation, or it's never going to be as good as it can be. And a lot of times you notice that, especially in terms of people in position or power, right? We've all kind of experienced or seen this. The ones who are leaders or managers who are kind of like bullies and they just bark orders, and a lot of times they don't really understand or know what they're talking about. They make ridiculous requests, and they show that they don't know, they don't have the skill set. That means they didn't get that position based on their merit, right? But the ones that really empowered you or inspired you, right, they weren't threatened by you, right? Because that's the other thing. Those who are kind of barking orders, they're probably thinking, oh, this person, he could take my job, so I need to put him in his place, right? But the ones that are the opposite, their job is to help you do your job, right? To give you the right conditions and lead you, not for the sake of showing their authority, but to help you get to where you need to be, both from the project standpoint and as in your career. Which means that it's probably based on their merit. They love what they do. They have something to offer you that you can learn from, and they're not threatened by you taking their job. Usually it's the opposite. It's like, I want to help you get to the point that you could take my job, like eventually take my job, really. And that shows that the motivation there is we're all the same in terms of our passion for the craft and where we want to be. And that all stems from even why you got hired, and it's because of your merit. It's because of your skill. So now it doesn't mean, of course, that networking in the end isn't that important if it's all about your portfolio. No, again, you need to have the opportunity to be seen, right? Going back to that restaurant analogy, if this restaurant is so amazing but no one knows it exists, it's going to close down, right? So they'll do what they can, they'll tell their friends and family, they'll put advertisements here and there, but they may not be able to, afford anything more than that, or certainly that the fact that their location isn't the best is already a deterrent. But if people show up in droves, guess what that means? The food is so good that it's worth going to that location or going that extra distance. Okay, so for most of us, we won't have the access or exposure to compared to other places. Like even if you think about in terms of location, right? Say somewhere like in California or Pasadena Art Center, right? You're already in a hub in terms of artists and professionals and studios. But if you're in a small town somewhere that no one even knows exists, at least the nice thing is, because of the internet, you can get your stuff out there, and you just treat it as a job, right? While you're looking for work, your job is to look for work, and you're constantly making content and putting it up there. Another thing I tell my students is, the longer you can't find a job, as long as you're not idle, it means you're getting better every day and increasing your chances of being discovered and being hired. So I had mentioned that after working for about 7 years at Pseudo Interactive, I became a freelancer. And in that time, most of my clients are not even from Ontario. They're not even from Canada. They're mostly from the States and in some cases Europe. Furthermore, most of these clients I've never seen in person. I don't even know what they look like or know what their voice sounds like, which means what was the main mode of communication? It was email. So I didn't have a business card. I didn't kind of go to an event and, try to hang out and like, hey, let's go have something to eat and get together. It's purely by putting my stuff out there and then being intentional and taking initiative in seeking these places, whether they have a job or not. Just contact them, not be belligerent or kind of pesty, but just to show that I'm serious about this and reaching out, and then keeping contact with them on a certain basis, whether it's every 2 months, 6 months, or more, depending on the situation. And eventually what will happen, just like that word of mouth amazing restaurant, is client work, because that was even something to consider. I asked other people that I respected who had been freelancing for a while, and I got similar answers, which were, expect to invest about 3 to 5 years in this before it really gets going, like to the point where you're earning steady income or as much as you were earning before on a salary position. And I found that to be true. I would say around the 3.5 year mark, people were contacting me more than me having to actually look for opportunities. And why is that? And eventually to the point that I didn't have to look anymore. The contracts came to me. And what are those contracts? All referral based. They're either repeat business or a company that heard from another company about me. And often they will tell me that in the email. But if they don't, I'll ask out of curiosity, oh, by the way, how did you find me? And most of the time it's, oh, I know so-and-so. And it's either someone I've worked with, but sometimes it's also peers, right? We stick together. It's not this competition to outdo each other. Not really. It's, another artist named so-and-so had mentioned you. Oh yeah, he's a friend of mine. That was nice of him. And what goes around comes around. And a lot of times if I don't take a contract, it's either because I'm too busy or I think also in many cases there's, I have a friend or someone who I think is better suited. And it's win-win. I've sent clients to my friends and vice versa. Okay? So yes, networking is very important. You should take it seriously. It should be authentic. You're not there trying to schmooze people just for the sake of it, right? It has to be pretty natural, right? It doesn't mean you're just waiting for things to happen. Of course, you have to be intentional about making the move, but it all is going to stem from how passionate about your work, and they'll see that comes through. But if someone is not passionate about their work and they're just trying to get a free ride, that also comes out in their way they socialize and network. We're very, we're very consistent that way. We're consistent animals, And so bottom line, that I would say that's the simple answer is if you're passionate about what you're doing, then you're more likely to work hard, not only at your art, but also getting your art seen and taking any opportunity and not being so selective. Okay? So to summarize, it's all comes down to the merit, the integrity of your work. You do need to make sure you get that work seen, okay? And you need to work hard at that. You need to cast that net wide and not assume that, only the best companies are going to hire me. And you be diligent about it on all those levels. And at the end of the day, meeting the right people will just help you get up to the top of the queue or the top of the line so you're not waiting as long. But it all ends the same way. If you do know someone and you get ahead of the line, you're either going to get hired sooner or rejected sooner, in a nutshell. So I think that's all I wanted to say about that. I hope that's helpful to some of you. So until next time, see ya.